On today's Tactica video, we are going to talk about wolf packs and hunting packs. So this is a very useful tactic to use in a game, and that is running really light, fast, decent damage output units in these wolf packs or hunting packs. And this idea kind of comes from, or this tactic comes from, submarine tactics that were used during World War II, where German subs would attack Allied shipping and convoys in groups instead of independently. So they would work together to work an area, much like a pack of wolves would work a herd of animals, and pick off weak, isolated, under strength, vulnerable enemy ships, right? We're going to translate this over to Alpha Strike in that we're going to use these hunting packs or wolf packs to do the same thing, to isolate and pick off vulnerable units that are unsupported or to take advantage of them. And we're going to do that through our damage output and our speed and our low profile, as opposed to through a large amount of health and volume of fire. Okay. So this tactic involves using 2 to 3, but sometimes up to 4 or 5 fast units, especially if you're running doubles. 4 to 5 is a lot more reasonable to run. It usually involves hovercraft that can move rapidly, but not always. And you're going to use them to isolate enemy units that are out of position and concentrate fire very quickly to eliminate them. While the use of wolf packs can occur incidentally, like during your games, they work best when you intentionally plan for them. And this takes place during your list building phase. So when you're building your list and you're trying to figure out what does my list want to do, or what do I want to do with my list, you may think to yourself, I want to put into my list the ability to run a wolf pack in certain missions, right? And you're doing this as a tactical consideration. So when you're building your list, you're thinking, I want skirmishers, I want a sniper, I want indirect fire, I want a brawler, I want runners who can grab objectives, I want hunters that can hunt down runners. You can also think about units and especially units that are flexible, that can fulfill multiple roles across missions. You can say, there may be a situation where I want to run these 2 or 3 units together as a block, as a dedicated block to form a wolf pack, right? And it usually requires you to dedicate around 60 points towards the pack. And this is actually, I think, is pretty reasonable. It's not unreasonable to throw 60 points or around 60 points at hovercraft or fast mechs or even some fast wheeled vehicles, like into your 350 list, and to be able to pull them out of the 350 and put them into a 250 to form a hunting pack is not the most crazy ask in the world, right? It's something that you probably already want to be there, but you want to consciously plan on that so that you're selecting the right units, right? I have found that the minimum speed for having an effective hunting pack or wolf pack is 16, but the faster is better. You can in some ways get away with it if you dip down to 14, which still maintains a TMM of 3, but you are not going to be as effective. And the reason is that these hunting packs and wolf packs can work a group of mechs or work an outside edge of an army together, and you can spread out and then come together, right? To focus your efforts in one spot. Or you can really utilize that speed as a group to get up and around a unit that might find themselves out of place or find themselves vulnerable. On these units, I usually don't consider the HP. What I want is that speed, and I want that damage output to be high enough, right? So I don't want to be spending 25 points for a unit that only does 1 damage at one or at short range, right? And I don't want to be spending 30 plus points on a unit that does 2 damage at short range, right? So I want to keep my damage output to be somewhere around 1 point of damage per 10 points I'm spending on the unit. And this is one of those examples where I will consider the short range damage instead of the medium, although a good medium damage output is always beneficial to a wolf pack. And it's something I do consider when building one, because sometimes the way that you hunt and move around will require you to engage the isolated target at both close and medium range. Like I said, hovercraft are the obvious candidates, but there are also some good wheeled options out there. They just can be slower. They're going to be in that 14, 16 kind of speed range. Also, don't be afraid to combine your hovercraft or whatever vehicles you're using with mechs as well. There are some light mechs out there that are very good. I'm thinking of like the Flea 17, for example, right? That makes a good addition to a wolf pack. They're very good, and the mechs can give you some tech. They can give you some tactical flexibility that you can't get from a vehicle. There's going to be some drawbacks, right? But the tactical flexibility you get is you're going to be resilient to motive hits because you can't take them, and also because of their height, you're not going to have to necessarily deal with hills in the same way, and they could be used as um, spotters for your indirect fire. So you have a group of hovercraft working an edge and working a unit, and then you have a light mech supporting them that is putting eyes on target for your indirect fire while you let your hovercraft kind of do the primary shooting. This would be especially true like if you say you took a solid 2-1 fast mech, like say a Mercury, right? And he's at medium range. Well, maybe you call an IF with him and you use him to bring that IF fire in on whatever your hovercraft are busy doing, right? So a couple of notable units. I'm not saying you have to take these units. There are plenty of other units out there. Remember, this is a 5,000 foot overview. I'm just going to make some recommendations here, but these are the type of vehicles and mechs that kind of would meet my criteria of being in a wolf pack. There's a gazillion factions and there's thousands of units in Alpha Strike. Like I said, you want something that's at least speed 16, TMM3, preferably TMM4, and stuff that's doing around 1 point of damage for every 10 points you're spending at short and or medium range. So combinations, I like for kind of the slower but heavier hitting stuff. I like that 3-3 Pegasus for 30 points. I like the 3-2 Drillsons and Maxims and Condors around 27 to 30 points. I like that 2-1 J. Edgar because he gets that 2 shots at short range. I like the 2-2 Harassers because they're wicked fast and they can throw 2 at medium range, and they're usually like closer to 20 points. Solid mechs include something like the 2-1-0 mechs. This could include a Mercury or Fireball, or something that does 2-2-0, like a beefed up Spider or that Flea 17. The point is to be fast, mobile, and to be able to do hit and run on isolated and vulnerable units. On the clan side, there's plenty of really fast clan mechs. I don't play a lot of clans, so I'm not as familiar with their units, but there's plenty of clan mechs that can do this just as effectively, and oftentimes they can get their damage output up even higher because they're clans. So the tactics, deployment. You have to start your tactics at the deployment. And the two things you either do is spread out your hovercraft and your fast units that are engaged in hunting, right? And that you can use this to throw your opponent off so you're not concentrated in one spot, right? And you might use this to pull your opponent out of deployment to respond to you, and then you can hyper concentrate later on as you hunt. Or you can concentrate them together and work as a pack from the get-go. I don't know that either answer is the wrong answer. I think you're going to have to consider those two things during deployment and figure out how and which units they're going to identify as the units that they want to hunt. Sometimes during deployment, your opponent misplays a unit, and you may say right from deployment, you go, ooh, that's a juicy target to use my wolf pack on, right? And so you may have to make decisions in real time about where you want to deploy these units so that they can reach. Certainly your speed 16 units are going to have to be a lot closer to their target if you're going to hunt a specific target from the get-go than your speed 18, 20, 22, 24 units, which have a lot more mobility and maneuverability. When you're wolf pack hunting, a lot of your units that you might have used as runners, you're going to switch their priority from grabbing objectives to prioritizing them for destroying units. And this work is going to work a lot better in some missions over the others. There are some missions where you want to be running and grabbing objectives. You're talking like capture the flag. You're talking, to some extent bunkers. Some of these other objective grabbing missions. Whereas other missions where there aren't objectives to grab are a lot more kind of obvious missions for the use of a wolf pack, and those are going to be like your headhunters, your stand-up fight, even overrun is a good mission to headhunt in. So every single turn, starting with deployment, you're going to be identifying you're going to constantly need to be thinking of potential targets, right? Because this tactic requires you to identify vulnerable and isolated units. And the reason that you're doing this is because it helps you minimize the number of shots coming in on you and helps you hyper focus on a single unit. And so if a unit is isolated and on its own, especially if it doesn't have like a particularly high damage output, if it's isolated and on its own, you're going to be protecting your wolf pack a lot more. Think about like submarine tactics. Like they would find ships that had fallen out of convoy, who were traveling on their own, who were on the edges of convoys, because if they got closer in and they got mixed into the full on fight, they were more susceptible to being intercepted by destroyers, aircraft, things like that. You're doing literally the exact same thing. So you want to every turn think about, as your opponent's moving, as they're around the board, and as you're going back and forth doing your moving, is which of these units have they misplayed and which one is vulnerable to being isolated. You can also combine this with other concentrated fires. So maybe you're using your wolf pack to hunt, and then you have some other units that can also aid in going after that unit. So every turn you're identifying potential targets. Oftentimes it's really important to wait to activate your hunting party or your pack until your target has moved, right? And when I say target, I don't necessarily mean your entire enemy force, but sometimes you can kind of get a sense of what their plan is and how they're moving their units. And so if you have a target in mind, wait until that target is activated so they can't respond to your hunting pack. And then the further into activation and movement your opponent goes, the more successful you will have hunting, because it'll be less likely that they can respond to your pack going after and hyper targeting a specific unit. So you're going to want to wait till the bulk of their force has activated, right? You're going to want to use cover and hills, especially double hills and buildings, if you're using hovercraft, to conceal and hide your movement. And the other thing you want to consider doing is identifying lanes and using what I call stacking. And what stacking is, you identify a very narrow kind of shooting lane. Maybe it's only a couple inches wide. And you literally stack your units one behind each other so that they're just all laser focused on the target and nothing else can really get in at them other than the target itself, especially if it's a rear shot, because then you're just force multiplying those attacks, right? So you want to reduce those incoming attacks, and you're basically trying to swarm a single target, outflank them, get in their rear without drawing fire in on yourself. And the whole point is to eliminate a unit off the board very rapidly and very quickly. Oftentimes you're going to have to work the edges of a battlefield, right? And this may require you to think about how you're moving the rest of your force to pull your opponent in and away from a unit that you want to isolate. Targets for isolating units often are their faster units, because oftentimes people get out over their skis, but it can also be slower and support units. So you use your movement to pull those skirmishers, juggernauts, even some of their fast recon scout units away from a larger, heavier unit. And then you use your mobility once that unit's isolated and unsupported to hyper focus on them and hunt them down with your wolf pack. You can also use these packs in groups to contain an enemy force, and mitigate your opponent's movement and their runners, because you have, it's not just one hovercraft and light mech that's defending the side of a board. It's a whole bunch of them. And as the game goes on, if you're rapidly deploying and redeploying these units back and forth, right, and hyper focusing them on a single unit to wipe them out, it's going to get in your opponent's head, and it's going to influence how they move, because they're going to say, well, if I move over here towards this edge and I want to make this risky move where this unit gets out on his own, then the opponent of them, is going to just rapidly move and pick that person off. So it's going to do is it's going to force them into a smaller and smaller bubble, or the goal would be to force them into a smaller and smaller bubble, and allow you to outflank them, get around, get on objectives, etc. And like if you have things like offboard artillery, this can be another thing that you use to help that wolfpack hunt. If you have things like snipers and indirect fire, you can run those with your wolfpack to help them hunt and to clean up that unit, to mop up that unit that you're targeting, and to add additional fire to whatever that wolf pack is hunting. So you can suddenly see how this 50, 60, 70 points of a hunting pack is having an outsized influence on the battle, because they can just rapidly deploy from end to end, and because you're using their low profile and mobility in the terrain to limit the number of shots that are coming in. and every turn you're eliminating a unit using them, they can have an outsized impact on the overall game and influence on the game. It's an excellent way to influence and manipulate your opponents. It works great. This works even better in doubles when you're going from 250 points to 500 points. I'm going to just give an example. When me and Jairus played doubles back at Gen Con, we ran 4 harassers and a couple other slower hovercraft, I believe, but the 4 harassers were the TMM5 harassers, and we would usually, at least 3 of them, if not all 4 of them, would work in a group. And those TMM5 harassers are just so wicked fast, and you could be on a 6-foot board. You could be in one spot, and the next turn be on the other side of the board or somewhere else. And because the board is so spread out in doubles, it's very easy and there's so much more terrain. It's very easy for units to become isolated, and it was very easy for them to hunt as a group and then stay out of line of sight. So, defending against this, you come to a game, you don't have a wolf pack, or maybe you do, and your opponent is using wolf pack tactics. How do you kind of checkmate, or at least check whatever someone's trying to do when they're wolf packing? Maybe they're intentionally wolf packing or they're not, right? How do you defend against this? So you have to have disciplined unit activation. Disciplined unit activation. Disciplined unit activation during the movement phase. You have to be very conscious and aware of what your opponent has not activated and how you're activating to have buddies, to have squire mechs, to have bodyguard mechs, to team up, right? To cover avenues of fire, to contain their wolf pack, right? You have to be able to put eyes on target and utilize indirect fire, and you have to try to counter their activations and force them to activate first, or split their activations and break that wolf pack up. So you need to be thinking about doing that during the movement phase. The other thing you can use is counter packs, right? So they have a wolf pack that's hunting your isolated stuff, and then you're using a wolf pack to hunt their wolf pack, right? And this is a perfect example of how baiting can be effective. So maybe you have your wolf pack on like the middle right-hand side of the board, or maybe they're spread out across the board, and you throw a vulnerable unit out there to tempt your opponent. They start to concentrate their wolf pack, and once they've activated their wolf pack, your wolf pack moves in to counter their wolf pack, right? So using counter packs can be very effective. Eliminating your opponent's concealment or cover through your movement. So making sure you're covering avenues of approach effectively, especially when you're placing your units, making sure your units have the ability to get in cover and stay behind cover, but also cover the lanes of approach, and understanding how far your opponent's units can move and not overextending yourself. And also, if you see that your opponent has a lot of these units in their force, is during terrain setup, trying to utilize terrain in such a way that they can't hunt behind it, or it makes it more difficult for them to hunt and take that cover, right? It's really important that if you see your opponent doing this, that you do not get out over your skis and you leave units hanging out there. I've kind of already discussed this, but I want to really emphasize this. You can't get out over your skis. Don't just throw a unit up the board by itself unsupported, because they will be hyper-focused by that wolf pack and they will be eliminated. If the risk that is coming from the pack is too high, and it's affecting your ability to win the game, is really crimping your style, you need to find a way to prioritize eliminating them. Whether this is dedicating indirect fire or sniper fire to it, whether it's getting together in a group and hunting them, or dedicating shots to breaking up the pack. And sometimes all you need to do is destroy 1 or 2 units from the pack, right? Like, let's say they're running 2 hovercraft and a mech. Maybe you destroy that mech, right? Or maybe you start working and you thought you could get away with working units singly. Maybe you're starting to pull together and you're forming little combat patrols instead. This can be especially like true if they're winning initiative. You have to be really careful in your prioritization and elimination of them, because they will try to out activate you. But also, if they make a mistake and they move within short range, or they move first, try to move within short range of them and try to take advantage of those mistakes of them moving first on accident, or getting too close to where you could move within short, to eliminate them and knock them down a peg or two, or try to take them out. Again, try to look to break up the pack or split them. This can be done through multiple, like, threatening objectives and forcing them to have to pull a fast unit back to protect an objective that they've moved past. Right. Try to put threats in different areas to try to break that pack up. You can also bait the pack, like I said, and then again use indirect fire, snipers, and artillery effectively to break them up. Oftentimes people will stack these packs, get them too close together. If you're using offboard artillery, you can pop them. And then if you have skilled down indirect fire that's stationary, you can call it in on those wolf pack or those units from those wolf pack and try to knock them down a peg or two. Wolf packs can be very, very effective in games. And I think that if you haven't been using them, you should consider them. They're a lot of fun to use. If you're using one of these, if you're wanting to like really practice Wolfpack tactics in a fun, friendly pickup game, try to take a whole bunch, right? Try to take a whole bunch of units that would fit this criteria. Take 4, 5, 6, 7, 4, 5, 6, 7 hovercraft in a list and just practice with it. That's how I kind of learned how to do it. Is I took a pirate list years ago that had like 8 hovercraft in it and 2 fastmax and just played it for like a month. And I had a lot of fun doing it. And I really learned how to wolf pack with those tactics, because those units are fast. They have a decent damage output, but they don't have a lot of HP. So you have to be really cagey. So naturally I was forced to kind of group them up and work my opponent one unit at a time, right, and take them out, and basically learned how to learn my Wolfpack tactics from that. If you've used Wolfpack tactics or hunting pack tactics successfully or unsuccessfully, leave a comment below, and otherwise may the blessings of Blake be upon you.